There are moments in life when everything looks fine on the surface, yet something deep inside quietly begins to question itself. Not because you are weak, but because the path ahead feels longer than you expected. Progress feels slow. Certainty fades, and doubt whispers that maybe you are behind, or worse, lost. This story exists for those moments, because what we often call doubt is not the absence of direction, it is the pressure of becoming someone new. In a quiet coastal town where mornings arrived gently and evenings carried long silences, there lived a man named Elias Rowan. From the outside, his life appeared steady, but inside, he carried a growing fear that his journey had somehow gone wrong, that destiny had passed him by without explanation. What Elias didn't yet know was this: the journey never betrays those who stay present within it. Elias Rowan woke each morning before the town did, not because he had to, but because stillness felt safer than noise. The coastal air crept through the cracked window of his small apartment, carrying the scent of salt and old wood. From his kitchen table he could see the harbor just beginning to stir. Fishing boats rocked gently, as if even they were undecided about moving forward. Elias watched them often. They reminded him of himself, prepared, steady, yet strangely hesitant. On paper, his life made sense. He worked consistently. He kept promises. He followed routines with a quiet discipline that impressed others. People described him as reliable, grounded, calm, but none of them knew how heavy calm could feel when it masked uncertainty. Elias believed life was supposed to offer signs, clear markers that told you you're on the right path. He had waited for them patiently, years even, and while time kept moving, those signs never seemed to arrive. Or maybe they had, and he simply didn't recognize them. Each day followed a familiar rhythm. Morning walks along the shoreline, work done carefully, without shortcuts. Evening spent reading or staring at nothing in particular. It was a good life, just not a convincing one. There was a question Elias carried silently, never spoken aloud because he feared what it might reveal. What if I believed in the wrong journey? What if all this effort, this patience, this discipline was misplaced? Doubt didn't arrive loudly. It never shattered his days or disrupted his responsibilities. It simply sat beside him, like a shadow that grew longer as the light faded. He noticed it most when others spoke about ambition, about momentum, about knowing exactly where they were headed. Elias listened politely, nodded when expected, but felt something tighten inside his chest. Not jealousy, something quieter, a sense of being late to his own life. At night, when the world softened and the town exhaled into sleep, Elias often lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He replayed choices, reconsidered decisions, wondered whether purpose was something you discovered or something you missed without realizing. He told himself doubt was normal, that everyone questioned themselves sometimes. Still, the weight remained. What Elias didn't understand yet was that doubt often visits those who are close to change, not those who are lost. But at this stage of his journey, doubt felt like a verdict, not a signal. And so he kept moving forward, one disciplined day at a time, believing that clarity would eventually reward patience. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet uncertainty, the very thing he feared, was already shaping him for what came next. The journey had not abandoned him. It was only asking him to listen more closely. If doubt was the quiet weight Elias carried, discipline was the thing that kept him upright. He didn't wait for motivation. He believed too much waiting was what led people astray. Each morning, he walked the same stretch of shoreline, his steps measured, his breath steady. The sea was rarely dramatic. Most days it simply existed, consistent and indifferent. Elias liked that about it. It reminded him that progress didn't always announce itself. He began to notice small shifts, not miracles, not revelations, just moments. His work grew sharper, more intentional. Tasks that once felt routine now carried a quiet pride. He finished what he started. He showed up when it would have been easier not to. Over time, people noticed a nod of appreciation here, a brief word of trust there, nothing grand, but enough to suggest movement. These moments fed him. They whispered, "You are moving forward, even if you can't see the destination." Elias told himself this was what purpose looked like: consistency over chaos, discipline over impulse. He believed that if he stayed steady long enough, certainty would eventually meet him halfway. Some days, it almost did. There were mornings when the sun broke through the clouds just right, casting a golden line across the water. In those moments, Elias felt alive, as if the effort mattered, as if the journey was quietly unfolding exactly as it should. He began setting small goals, not dreams. Those felt too fragile. Just commitments. Wake early. Finish the work. Improve one thing each day. And it worked, at least on the surface. But beneath the structure, a subtle flaw took root. Elias measured his worth by momentum, by visible progress, by evidence. On days when the routine flowed, he felt grounded. When results appeared, even small ones, he felt reassured. But on days when effort didn't translate into recognition or growth, doubt returned sharper than before. He didn't realize it yet, but he had tied belief to outcome. As long as things moved forward, he trusted the journey. When they slowed, he questioned everything. Still, hope lived in the effort itself. Elias believed that discipline was proof of faith, that showing up was the same as believing, and maybe, for a while, that was true. He stood a little straighter, spoke with more certainty, allowed himself to imagine a future that made sense. But the journey has a way of testing belief before it rewards it. And just as Elias began to feel that his patience was finally paying off, life prepared to remind him of something essential. Progress does not protect you from collapse. It only prepares you for it. The collapse didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden loss that demanded attention. It arrived quietly, through an email that was shorter than expected, through a conversation that ended too quickly, through a door that closed without explanation. Elias read the message once, then again. It informed him that the opportunity he had been working toward for months, quietly, diligently, would not move forward. No details, no apology, just a polite ending. He stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for a reaction to form. But nothing came. Not anger, not grief, just a hollow stillness, as if something inside him had stepped away. That night, he walked the shoreline later than usual. The wind had picked up, rougher now, scattering the calm he had come to rely on. The water no longer rocked gently. It pushed back. Elias felt exposed. This wasn't just a setback. It felt like a verdict. He replayed every decision that led here, every disciplined morning, every sacrifice made quietly, without praise. The thought that echoed loudest wasn't, "Why did this happen?" but "What if this means I was wrong? Wrong about his timing, wrong about his patience, wrong about believing that staying steady was enough. In the days that followed, routine became heavier. The same habits that once grounded him now felt mechanical, almost mocking. He completed tasks out of obligation, not belief. Discipline, once a source of strength, now felt like proof of foolishness. People around him didn't notice much change. He still showed up, still performed well, still nodded and listened, but inside something fractured. The journey he trusted no longer felt neutral, it felt indifferent. At night, doubt returned, sharper and more personal. It no longer whispered questions. It made statements. You waited too long. You should have chosen differently. This was your chance. Elias didn't argue back. He didn't know how. Failure has a way of shrinking the future, of turning possibility into regret. And Elias felt it happening in real time. His world narrowing, his belief system unraveling. For the first time, he considered the unthinkable. Maybe the journey wasn't guiding him. Maybe it had been misleading him all along. He stood at the edge of the water one evening, watching waves dissolve into the sand, and felt something unfamiliar. Resentment, not toward others, toward the path itself. He had done everything right, so why did it feel like everything was wrong? What Elias didn't understand yet was this: failure doesn't arrive to punish belief. It arrives to strip it down to something real. But in this moment, standing between effort and emptiness, all he felt was loss. And loss has a way of demanding answers before wisdom is ready to respond. Elias didn't accept the loss. Not openly, not quietly, not at all. Instead, he argued with it in the only place no one could hear, inside his own mind. He told himself the outcome was temporary, a misunderstanding, a delay that would correct itself if he stayed alert enough. He reread old messages, searched for hidden meanings, imagined alternate endings where someone realized a mistake and called him back. Letting go felt irresponsible, as if releasing the past meant admitting it never mattered. So Elias held on. He adjusted his routines, not to move forward, but to rewind. He worked harder, not wiser. Discipline turned obsessive. Each effort fueled by guilt rather than purpose. If he just proved himself enough, he believed, the journey would apologize. But reality doesn't negotiate. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing changed. The harbor kept moving. Boats came and went. Life continued with a calm that felt almost insulting. Elias watched it all with quiet disbelief, as though the world had failed to acknowledge something important had broken. Inside him, doubt evolved. It no longer asked whether he was behind. It insisted he had fallen off entirely. He began to measure his life against imagined timelines, against people he barely knew, against versions of himself that existed only in regret. Every comparison ended the same way, with the belief that he had waited too long to become who he was meant to be. Sleep grew restless. Silence grew heavier. At night, Elias sat at the kitchen table long after the lights across the harbor had dimmed. The same question circled endlessly. If this wasn't my path, then what was? He felt stuck between two fears, afraid to move forward without certainty, and afraid to let go of a past that no longer responded to him. Holding on gave him something to fight against. Letting go would leave him with nothing but himself. So he chose resistance. He told himself that perseverance meant refusal, that strength meant not accepting endings. He believed that if he suffered long enough, meaning would eventually return. But all suffering without release does is harden the heart. Elias didn't see it yet, but he wasn't preserving hope. He was delaying healing. The journey had shifted, quietly and without permission. And Elias, still gripping an old version of himself, was being dragged forward by time instead of walking with it. Reality stood still, patient and unmoved, and Elias, exhausted from arguing with what was already gone, began to feel something even heavier than doubt. Emptiness. Emptiness doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, filling the spaces where belief used to live. Elias stopped walking the shoreline at sunrise, not intentionally. He simply stopped waking early. Mornings blurred into afternoons. Time lost its edges. The routines that once anchored him now felt meaningless, like rituals performed for a god that no longer answered. He withdrew without explanation. Messages went unanswered. Invitations expired quietly. People assumed he was busy, focused, handling things his own way. Elias didn't correct them. He didn't have the energy. The apartment grew quieter, too quiet. At night he sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at the same patch of ceiling. Thoughts passed through him without resistance. Regret, shame, fatigue. They didn't hurt as sharply anymore. They just existed, heavy and unmoving. This was the lowest point, not because something terrible happened, but because nothing did. No crisis, no intervention. Just the slow realization that he no longer recognized himself. Elias felt detached from the person he had been, the disciplined man, the believer in patience, the one who trusted the journey. That version of him felt naive now, almost embarrassing. He questioned everything. Was discipline just fear disguised as control? Was patience another word for avoidance? Had he mistaken endurance for purpose? There were moments when he considered starting over entirely. New city, new work, new identity. But even those thoughts felt exhausting. Change required energy he no longer had, so he stayed still. And in that stillness, something fragile surfaced. Not hope, honesty. For the first time, Elias admitted what he had been avoiding. He wasn't angry about the failure. He was grieving the meaning he had attached to it. The belief that effort guaranteed direction. That staying disciplined would protect him from uncertainty. It hadn't. And that truth, painful as it was, stripped him down to something real. In the quietest hour of one sleepless night, Elias whispered a thought he had never allowed himself to form. I don't know who I am without the journey I believed in. That admission didn't fix anything, but it cleared the noise. And sometimes the lowest point isn't where we break, it's where we finally stop pretending we're not lost. Elias didn't know it yet, but this was the moment before change became possible. Because when everything false falls away, the only thing left is what can grow. The encounter didn't happen when Elias was searching for answers. It happened when he had stopped expecting them. One late afternoon, restless and unsure why, Elias left his apartment and walked toward the harbor. The sky was pale, undecided between blue and gray. The air carried that in-between feeling, neither warm nor cold, neither ending nor beginning. He sat on a weathered bench near the water, watching the tide move in slow, patient cycles. He wasn't thinking about healing, or purpose, or belief. He was simply there, letting time pass him instead of fighting it. That was when the old man sat beside him. No introduction, No hesitation, just the quiet weight of another presence sharing the bench. The man wore a faded coat and held a paper cup of tea, steam curling gently upward. He stared at the water the way Elias once did, without expectation, without urgency. They sat in silence longer than most people would tolerate. Then the man spoke. "You look like someone who's been walking a long way without stopping," he said, voice calm, almost amused. Elias didn't respond right away. He didn't feel defensive or exposed, just seen. "I thought stopping meant quitting," Elias finally said, surprising himself. The old man smiled faintly. "Stopping just means you're tired. Quitting means you don't care anymore." Elias watched the water ripple against the rocks. "I cared. Too much, maybe." The man nodded. "That's usually the case." They talked in fragments, not a conversation, more like shared observations, about the sea, about time, about how people mistake motion for meaning. At one point, Elias said quietly, "I trusted the journey, and it didn't take me where I thought it would." The old man sipped his tea before answering. "Journeys rarely do." "That's not comforting," Elias said. "It's not meant to be," the man replied gently. "Comfort keeps people holding on too long." Elias felt something loosen inside him. Not relief, permission. "Then what's the point of believing?" he asked. The old man turned to him then, eyes steady. "Belief isn't trusting the outcome. It's trusting yourself to stay present when the outcome changes." That sentence stayed. The man stood soon after, nodding once before leaving. No goodbye, no lesson wrapped neatly at the end, just words placed carefully like stones in water. Elias remained on the bench long after he was gone. The tide continued its rhythm, indifferent yet dependable. For the first time in months, Elias didn't feel pressured to interpret the moment. He didn't chase meaning. He let it sit. And in that quiet acceptance, something shifted. The journey hadn't failed him. He had simply mistaken where it was supposed to lead. Rebirth did not arrive as clarity. It arrived as space. Elias didn't wake the next morning with answers or renewed ambition. He woke with a subtle change, an absence of urgency. The heavy need to figure everything out had softened, replaced by a quieter willingness to simply stay where he was. He returned to the shoreline, not at sunrise, but later, when the light was gentler and the world less demanding. He walked without tracking steps or measuring time. For the first time in a long while, the walk wasn't a task. It was just movement. He began making small choices rooted in acceptance, not surrender, not ambition, acceptance. He allowed himself to rest without guilt, to work without expecting it to justify his existence. Discipline returned, but in a different form. No longer a shield against doubt, but a way to care for himself. Some days were still heavy, but they passed. Elias stopped replaying the past. When memories surfaced, he didn't argue with them. He acknowledged the loss, then returned to the present moment. This simple act, staying, felt unfamiliar at first. Vulnerable, honest. Healing, he realized, wasn't about replacing one belief with another. It was about releasing the need for certainty altogether. He began writing again. Not plans, not goals, just reflections, thoughts without direction, observations without conclusions. It felt like speaking to himself without judgment. Gradually, something steady emerged, a sense of strength that didn't depend on progress, a calm that wasn't threatened by pauses, a purpose that didn't require explanation. Elias understood now what the old man meant. Belief wasn't a contract with the future. It was a relationship with the present. Each day he chose to show up, not to prove anything, but to remain connected to life, to himself, to the journey as it was, not as he wanted it to be. This wasn't a transformation anyone else could see, but it was real. And real change, Elias was learning, rarely announces itself. It grows quietly, through humility, release, and the courage to begin again without needing permission. The return of doubt was subtle. It didn't arrive as despair this time. It arrived as nostalgia. Old thoughts resurfaced during quiet moments, while Elias folded laundry, while he watched the tide recede, while he sat alone with his writing. They came dressed as reasonable questions, not accusations. What if you're settling? What if acceptance is just another excuse? What if you let go too soon? The difference now was not the presence of doubt, but Elias's response to it. He noticed how quickly the mind reached for old patterns, how easily it tried to measure worth through momentum again. Some days he caught himself craving proof, visible progress, recognition, confirmation that he hadn't wasted time. The old version of him whispered that he should hurry, that he should reclaim the intensity he once had. That calm was dangerous. And for a moment, Elias almost believed it. There were days when he pushed himself too hard, mistaking urgency for purpose. Days when rest felt uncomfortable again, when silence threatened to turn into avoidance. This was the new struggle. Not collapse, but temptation. The temptation to return to what was familiar, even if it had once broken him. But Elias had learned something in the quiet. Strength wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fueled by force. It lived in consistency. So when old habits appeared, he didn't shame himself. He didn't panic. He noticed them, acknowledged them, and chose differently. Sometimes imperfectly, sometimes late, but intentionally. He returned to the present again and again. Discipline became an anchor, not a weapon. A rhythm that supported him rather than defined him. He showed up with patience, understanding that transformation was not a single decision, but a series of gentle ones. Some days felt ordinary, some felt uncertain, but none felt false. Elias understood now that rebirth didn't erase the past. It taught him how to walk alongside it without being dragged. And that was the real test. Not whether he could change, but whether he could remain steady when nothing demanded change. He could. And in that quiet consistency, belief began to rebuild itself. Not as urgency, but as trust. Peace didn't arrive as happiness. It arrived as alignment. Elias noticed it one morning while standing at the edge of the harbor, watching the light spread slowly across the water. There was no dramatic realization, no surge of emotion, just a simple awareness. I am where I am supposed to be right now. That thought didn't excite him. It grounded him. His days carried a different weight now, not heavier, but true. He moved through them without rushing, without resisting. Work became an expression of care rather than proof. Rest became intentional rather than earned. Purpose, he realized, wasn't something waiting in the future. It was something practiced. Elias no longer compared his pace to others. The imagined timelines had dissolved. He understood that every journey moves at the speed required to teach what cannot be rushed. There were still uncertainties, still questions without answers, but they no longer demanded resolution. They existed alongside him, not above him. He felt a quiet confidence grow, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that endures. A strength that came from surviving doubt without letting it define him. Some evenings he returned to the bench where he had met the old man. Not to search for him, but to remember the moment he stopped fighting the journey. He had learned to walk without needing proof, and in doing so, he discovered something unexpected. Freedom. Freedom from urgency. Freedom from regret. Freedom from the fear of being behind. The journey hadn't become easier, but it had become honest. And honesty, Elias now knew, was the foundation of peace. And now, this story turns gently toward you. Because somewhere in Elias's quiet doubt, there is a reflection you recognize. There are moments in life when you question your pace, when discipline feels unrewarded, when patience starts to feel like a mistake. And in those moments, it's easy to believe the journey has failed you. But the truth is quieter than that. The journey doesn't rush, it doesn't explain itself, and it doesn't adjust to our expectations. It teaches. Sometimes it teaches through progress, sometimes through failure, and sometimes through stillness, when you are forced to sit with who you are without outcomes to lean on. Elias learned that belief is not about trusting where you'll end up. It's about trusting yourself while you're unsure. He learned that discipline is not meant to control life, but to support you when life becomes unclear. That strength isn't proven in intensity, but in consistency, especially when no one is watching. He learned that letting go is not weakness, it is courage in its most honest form. Because releasing the past doesn't erase meaning, it makes room for something truer to grow. He learned that failure doesn't cancel your journey, it deepens it. It removes illusions and leaves you face to face with what actually matters. He learned that purpose is not found by chasing certainty, but by staying present long enough for clarity to form on its own. And perhaps most importantly, he learned this: you are not behind, you are not late, and you are not lost. You are becoming. If you're listening to this while doubting your own path, let this be your reminder. Quiet journeys still arrive. Slow growth still counts. And unseen progress is still progress. Stay with yourself. Stay disciplined, but gentle. Let go of what no longer responds to you, and trust that the journey is shaping you in ways you can't yet measure. If this story gave you a moment of clarity, peace, or reflection, carry it with you. Share it with someone who might need it. And if you're walking your own quiet path, consider staying connected. Through more stories like this, the journey continues, and so do you.